On Saturday, 1st September 1934, the body of a young woman was discovered on a roadside near Albury in New South Wales, Australia. It was later identified as Florence Linda Agostini, but was it really her? Linda Platt, as she was known, had been born at Forest Hill in London on 12 September 1905. As a young woman, she worked in a confectionery shop, but following a failed relationship, she moved to New Zealand aged 19 to begin a new life. In 1927, she moved to Sydney, Australia, and found lodgings in Darlinghurst Road in the King's Cross area, working in a cinema. She enjoyed spending her free time drinking and attended many parties, and in 1930 she married Italian-born Antonio Agostini in a Sydney registry office. She still enjoyed partying and was heavily influenced by her friends, so Agostini suggested they move to Melbourne. In late August 1934, Linda suddenly went missing. She had no contact with her family or friends, and it was totally out of character. A week later, on 1st September, a body was found near Albury, which lies near the New South Wales and Victoria border. Tom Griffith was making his way along the Howlong Road with his prized bull when he noticed the body lying at the side of the road in a culvert. There was also a strong smell of kerosene. A hessian bag partially covered the body, and it had been burned, but had he not been walking by, it may have lain there undiscovered much longer. Her head was wrapped in a towel, and it was clear she'd been badly beaten. It later transpired she'd also been shot, as there was a bullet wound on the back of her neck. The Pyjama Girl tag came about due to her wearing yellow pyjamas. They had a Chinese dragon motif and were luxurious for the time. The woman was petite and in her 20s, but the initial investigation failed to identify her. Her remains were taken to Sydney, where she was steeped in formalin by the University of Sydney's Medical School and put on public display. She remained there in the solution until 1942, when she was taken to police headquarters, where she stayed for a further 2 years. A number of suggestions were made as to who she was. Anna Philomena Morgan was missing around the same time as Linda, and both women had similarities to the cadaver. They were around the right height and age, but the New South Wales police were satisfied that she was neither of these young missing women. In 1944, a full 10 years since the body had been found, the forensic evidence in the case was re-examined, with the inquest lasting 32 days. The coroner, Mr. Tingate, using dental records, announced that it was Linda Agostini. The principal witness was William Joseph O'Brien, a dentist from Sydney, who'd attended to Linda's teeth on several occasions. He said that moulds made of the deceased's mouth corresponded with dental work he'd carried out on Linda in 1930 and 1932. He identified Antonio Agostini as having introduced the woman as his wife. He also told the inquest that Linda had blue eyes and light brown hair. Yet another witness, Mrs. Doreen Dunn of Bondi, New South Wales, stated that in 1927 a girl named Linda Platt got a job as an usherette where she too was employed. They shared a flat together, and Linda had told her later that she'd married Agostini. On 4th March, she had identified Pyjama Girl as Linda, but claimed her eyes were brown. Tingate went on to dismiss the photographic evidence of Dr. Parker Benbow and the evidence given by Mrs. Jean Routledge of Bomaderry, New South Wales, that it was her daughter, Anna Morgan. Dr. Wright-Smith corroborated evidence given by Dr. C.H. Mollison that the bullet hadn't killed her and that she died as a result of blows to her head. However, there was still the question of eye colour. Professor Sidney Sutherland, Professor of Anatomy at Melbourne, who was recalled, gave evidence stating categorically the eyes were brown, but Dr. Kevin O'Day, an eye specialist, rejected the possibility of the eyes being brown. He was adamant they were light in colour, so could this have been the body of Anna Morgan right enough? Mr. Reid, the counsel helping the coroner, stated 10 witnesses had identified the body as Linda's, and went on to say that Mrs. Routledge's testimony was unsafe, as she'd denied for 6 years that the body could have been her daughter. That was up until the time she met Dr. Benbow. Sergeant Victor King of Redfern in Sydney also took the witness stand. He said that around 1928, Linda Platt had visited his home, and about 2 years later he met her again, after she'd married. He asked her how she and her husband were getting on, and she replied, "Not the best," and added that he'd threatened to shoot her. King said he'd seen the body in Sydney and was satisfied beyond any doubt that it was indeed Linda Agostini. Tony, her husband, had already come under suspicion and was arrested. Between 1940 and 1944, he'd been interred in various camps due to his Italian background. William Mackay, the police commissioner, had known Agostini before the war, as he'd frequented restaurants where he'd worked, and he interviewed him. Agostini appeared nervous, and after Mackay prompted him, he confessed to killing his wife. In his testimony, he admitted he'd accidentally shot and killed her at their townhouse in Swanston Street, Carlton, Melbourne, and concerned that he would be arrested for murder, had driven the body over the state border and dumped it near Albury. He'd then poured petrol over her and set her on fire, hoping to destroy all evidence of what had happened. Agostini was charged with murder, and at last the Pyjama Girl had been unequivocally identified. He was extradited to Melbourne, where he stood trial in June 1944, where much of the evidence from the inquest was used during the trial before Mr. Justice Lowe. He was acquitted of murder, but was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison with hard labour. Lowe said he believed the jury had been merciful, although they had rejected his account of her death being accidental. In his summing up, he said, "My view of the jury's finding is that they thought you had been a long time sorely tried by your wife's conduct, and had been at the time you attacked her, provoked to your limits of your endurance." He went on, "You then attacked her, inflicting dreadful injuries, causing death. The weapon you used must have been heavy and used with great violence. Such conduct is a serious crime." In 1948, Agostini was released and deported to Italy, where he died in 1969. The problem with this case was that Linda had blue eyes, while the decedent more likely had brown. Her nose was a different shape, and her bust size was wrong. Around 125 women were possibilities when the body was recovered, but for some reason Agostini admitted murdering his wife and said the body was hers. If the body was indeed Linda, then case closed. But if it wasn't, who was she? And will her killer ever be brought to justice?